All right, we are recording. Welcome everyone, or whoever is out there listening, to the very first Design Thinker podcast. I'm Dani Chesson, and with me is...
My name is Peter Allan, and I'm pleased to be here with you, Dani.
And whoever is listening to us. So what are we talking about today, Pete?
So today we thought we would talk about co-design, and we're going to explore what that word means to us and have a chat about it, get into some deep and meaningful conversation, and we'll try and wrap up at the end with something helpful to everyone.
Something useful, hopefully.
Yeah.
Awesome. So co-design. What does co-design mean to you, Pete?
Well, co-design, that's a good start-off question. What does co-design actually mean for me? And I know it means different things to different people. For me, co-design is going through a design process and having the people you're trying to help, or your people you're designing for, part of that design process. I'm going to keep it simple and leave it there, but we can go into more detail. What about you? What does co-design mean to you?
So like you, I believe that co-design has different meanings to different people. I think what I would add to my, I agree with your meaning of it. I think what I would add to that is co-design can also be where two or more people come together to create something. So I think this podcast is a good example of that, right? You and I are coming together to create something. We've planned it and designed it based on our insights. And hopefully someone will find it useful. So I think co-design can work in both those ways, where we engage the people that are going to benefit from it, but also co-designing on behalf of someone with some understanding of who you're designing it for, of course. Nice.
Yeah, I like that. I like the idea that so I have a perspective on design that you can start anywhere in a design process, provided you have an intent in mind. So for example, with co-design, like you and I, we've designed this together, we've co-designed this, but I think the most important people we haven't involved in the process yet are the people who are hopefully going to listen to this podcast, to our audience. So effectively, we're kind of starting with our ideas. We've put this prototype together, and we're going to start co-designing with our audience by having them listen to this and telling us what they like about it, what they don't like, and any questions and ideas they've got. To me, that's co-design.
I agree. And one of those, pieces of feedback is like, please stop.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, like that's. I was actually running some workshops last week, and at the end of the workshop, where we learn about design thinking and teach people who are new to it what it might be about and what they can use it for. We introduced this idea of, well, you've built a prototype and you've tested it. What options do you have now? And one of those options is always just stop, just stop, and slowly walk away, park it forever or park it temporarily, come back to it when the time is right. So yeah, just stop is an option. We'll take that as feedback.
Yeah. So what do you think, as you think about co-design, what do you think are the conditions or elements? Like, what do you need to be able to do co-design?
That's a great question. Well, I think the first one I mentioned earlier is intent. And I think any design needs an intent. You just need to set off in a particular direction with the intent to change the world, hopefully for the better in some way, by usually by helping people achieve something or do something differently. So intent. I guess using your definition of co-design, you need at least one other person at least one other person. And I think if we use that as, my definition or perspective on co-design, we also at some point need to include the people who are actually going to be using what we're creating. So I've heard some people talk about it's maybe the difference between designing to or even designing for and moving into designing with. Yeah, those are some simple things. I think depending on who you are designing with, who you are hoping to help out, then you're going to need at some point to get a good understanding of them and their world. And if we take that a step further, then perhaps you're going to need some the right attitude or mindset and some tools to help you gain that understanding. Yeah, that's what about you? What would you add to that? Do you think we need to go into some, like, probably be helpful for people if we get into some more concrete detail about, those mindsets or tools perhaps, or specific to co-design?
Yeah, I think for me, when I think about what are the things that we need to be able to do co-design, I think I go much more fundamental than that.
Okay.
Like for me, it's like I think a starting point for an individual is looking at, like, how are my listening skills?
Huh.
How
Yeah,
are my
nice.
observation skills, right?
Yeah.
Because I think we all get caught up in the trap of, like, we listen to respond, but with co-design, you have to listen to learn.
Yeah.
So I think for me, that's kind of a foundational, piece. And I think the second one for co-design is being observant. Like it's almost like a curious way to observe the world. Like, oh, that's interesting. Why is that happening? Or, why does that person engage in that way? So that those kind of, I think those observant skills and listening skills are two very foundational things. And then I think from there you build on, what's the intent of what I'm trying to create. And I definitely, so the simple fact that you put co in front of design requires at least one other person.
Yeah, at least. This might hopefully this isn't taking us too off tangent, but what if we, and I do like, we'll maybe come back to the concrete and foundational skills, because I think there's more to explore. But some of our listeners might be, and I'm thinking, what's the if we're not co-designing, like if I'm designing either by myself or you and I are working together, but we're not co-designing, what are we doing? Has that got a name? Are we just designing?
I've never thought about that. I feel like this is a Googling moment.
Okay. All right. Well,
let's see what Google says.
Okay.
What's the opposite of co-design?
Yeah. Put it into Google. Lots of people will have an opinion, a perspective on that, I reckon. What's gonna?
I'm not getting, I think I may have broken Google, Pete.
Oh, wow.
I put in what's the opposite of co-design, and what I'm getting are more synonyms of co-design. So this might be something we have to, so if I had to kind of define the opposite of co-design, the word that comes to me is creating in a vacuum.
Okay.
Working in a vacuum. Because it's very, I think we create things in a vacuum all the time. And sometimes we do that for ourselves and it's fine, right? Like I think about this morning, I made myself a smoothie, and now I've worked very hard to design myself this ideal smoothie that I like to have in the morning. It's got blueberries, a little bit of cashews, like it's got, and I've designed that for myself. And I did that in, almost complete isolation. I didn't consult other people, and it worked out great. But where that goes wrong is now if I'm making a smoothie for you and I go, oh, great, I love this smoothie. I'm just going to make this and Pete will love it too. And you drink it and you go, this is the most disgusting thing I've ever.
Yeah. And maybe I didn't even need or want a smoothie and you're making me drink the smoothie.
Yeah, maybe you're a toast and eggs kind of guy.
Yeah. That could be true. Okay, I love that. That's a great example. And likewise, let's think if I think about a work story. Yeah, I might be. I'm always tinkering and experimenting with the way that I do my work. I might set up my work day and think about my time and organize my time in a particular way. One example is I keep 2 windows of time set aside every day to look at emails and respond to messages, and I tend not to respond to anything outside of those times. That works for me really well. But if I was to, and I've designed that and I've kind of iterated and worked out what works for me, but it would be remiss of me, as I certainly wouldn't be co-designing if I was to force other people to do the same thing. So I would instead start working with those people and understand, well, what's your day like and what's your approach to time and how do you like to approach things, what's important to you, and then figure out whether that approach works for them. Okay, I took this on a tangent. I think that's for me, sometimes defining the opposite. What's the opposite of this thing we're exploring can help us kind of get towards a concrete definition. So you were talking about foundations like listening or observing. I love those, and I wonder whether underpinning those two things is a mindset that we try and adopt when we're designing, and that's curiosity. So do you think that's a helpful thing to think about? Let's be curious so I can listen and observe and understand more.
I struggle with, is it curiosity or is it empathy?
Okay.
Because and I think this goes back to like listening to understand, right? And I think out of that understanding is a desire to want to empathize. Like, I want to know what Pete wants for breakfast because I genuinely want to understand him. So that, that's where I kind of go with that. But so I it's kind of a chicken and an egg thing, right? Like, do you first have curiosity and that helps build empathy, or do you have to have empathy to be curious?
Yes, maybe it's different for different people. People start with almost a ready-made sense of empathy, and like you're suggesting, and that takes them down the path of being curious. So perhaps it's a bit like the way I think of a design process, which is, if you're you can start anywhere. So start with something is better than you just start with something, start somewhere. So if empathy is what comes to you more naturally than curiosity, or if you're feeling more empathy right here, right now, then start with empathy and use that to dial up your sense of curiosity, and perhaps vice versa. If you're feeling a bit more nosy and less kind of tuned into your caring side, perhaps in that moment or in this particular situation, the thing that you're designing for, then do that. Maybe it is a situational thing, and as you're stepping into discovering a problem initially before you're solving it, if something appears more functional on the surface, then maybe start with curiosity. If something feels a bit more human or emotive to begin with, then start with empathy.
I know this is like a little bit off topic, but I think it's like I think this is kind of unsurfacing something about the entire human-centered design process, which is that I think when we're taught it or exposed to human-centered design, we kind of are shown this linear process that we're supposed to follow. But in reality, that's not how it happens, right? Like, and this goes back to your point of you can actually start it anywhere. So I think that's also what this is kind of surfacing up.
Yeah, nice. So okay, so we've got ingredients for co-design. What we're saying is we definitely need at least one other person to get us going in co-design. We probably need more than that as we're moving forwards. We need some curiosity, we need some empathy, we need to have an intent around listening to understand. Similarly, we need to have an intent to observe people and things to understand, to gain an understanding. What are some other concrete things that we want to equip ourselves with when we're embarking on co-design?
I think there needs to, so once you have all those things, I think you need to have a shared understanding of what it is you're designing. You know, and I kind of think about some of the conversations we had about this podcast, like, you know, we both listen to different podcasts and we listen to some of the same ones, but we had very different ideas of what this could be. But we had to sit down and go, okay, but what do we want our podcast to be? And that can apply to anything, right? Even going back to, you know, the breakfast example. You have ideas of what breakfast is. I have ideas of what breakfast is. But if we're trying to create something together, we have to look at what is our understanding of those things, and then what are we trying to create?
Okay, nice. I like that thread, that thought. What the word that popped into my mind there as you were talking was compromise. So I wonder if you know, this is maybe a deeper philosophical question, but is the result of co-design, does it always involve some sort of compromise?
You know, the moment you said compromise, the word that came to the thing that came to mind is I remember reading or seeing or hearing somewhere about how sometimes when you compromise, everybody loses, or like nobody wins. But the purpose of design is to make something better, right? Is to transform a less than desirable situation into a more desirable one. So I struggle with how compromise works there, because I think what you're trying to do is create something bigger than ourselves. What are your thoughts?
Well, yeah, I absolutely think that. I think you know, this gets onto, you know, our personal perspectives on design and being a designer and what we're here for. And we, just to let the audience know, we sound like we're agreeing lots at the moment. We do have slightly different, we have slightly different perspectives on things. I definitely think for me that being a designer and the attraction of being a designer is that opportunity to create something bigger than ourselves. You know, I think, and my experience of things that have been designed well, it definitely feels as though, you know, the person or the people who've designed it, they're not coming through in that design. It feels like it is for me and helping me. So, you know, the kind of, if we play around with an opposite, if we go, does design involve compromise? Well, what if there was, if things were uncompromising? So, you know, the myth of the kind of lone or uncompromising designer, I think is just that. It's a myth, and there's always, you know, trade-offs or compromises to be made. And I think I've lost my train of thought there. The compromising, it's maybe the word compromising. Compromising, I guess, personal beliefs is in both what the problem is and what the solution is. I think maybe good design, good co-design means that you will need to make compromises, because you will discover that your initial hypothesis or belief or perspective is actually proved to be less true or less accurate than somebody else's as you go through a co-design process. Where am I going with that? Maybe it's the it kind of relates to curiosity, but maybe it's more specific. It's an attitude that and an acknowledgement that even though you might be stepping into it, like we do our best as designers to start with a hypothesis and really focus on what a problem is, but at some point we'll start to get ideas around what potential solutions might be, and even start early on get an idea of what the problem is. But perhaps stepping into something with just the awareness and acknowledgement that you will have to discard some of those early beliefs and hypotheses. Maybe that's the sort of compromise that I'm thinking of.
Yeah, I think that context helps me, and this is probably a good example of compromise in design happening in real time.
Okay.
Because I like the idea that when you described compromise as letting go of some things so that you can move closer to the thing you're trying to create, like I can see how that plays out as compromise in design, and you have to do that, right? Because if you kind of go into a co-design situation with, well, these are my ideas and I'm not yielding on them, then you're not really co-designing, you're just dictating what's going to happen.
Yeah.
So I think there is an element of sometimes your ideas will be used, sometimes they won't, and sometimes your ideas might be merged or blended or tweaked with other people's ideas. So I think there's kind of three outcomes that can happen
nice
in the co-design relationship.
I love that. So maybe the word that just let's try not to keep saying that, the word that's coming, so humility, maybe a sense of humility, and I guess a decision from the outset and a recognition that me, Peter, the designer, and Dani, the designer, let's stick to the podcast example. The podcast itself is it's neither you nor I, it's both of ours, or maybe even something more than just both of ours. But we decide that we're kind of in service, if you like, of the podcast itself, or the thing we're designing, or in service ultimately of our podcast audience, whoever that person is. So yeah, maybe it's so we've got curiosity, empathy, going to say humility, and then the thing I've just described as kind of being in service of is you mentioned it, it's something bigger than yourself, so you're kind of in service of that thing. And sometimes itself, I find it helpful to just put myself in the place of being I'm just like a conduit for this stuff. It's coming from somewhere, and I'm going to provide it, and we'll see where it goes and see what happens with it. But what do you think? Humility?
I think humility is extremely important. And the way I see that come to life is, I've put up ideas or, kind of prototypes. And in my head, it was like, oh, wow, what a brilliant thing. And when I've put it out into the world, I've almost made myself laugh, because it's like, this is so ridiculous. What was I thinking? And I think the ability to be able to do that is really important. In a co-design relationship, right? Because like I have to, all kinds of stuff can come out of my thinking, and I have to be able to be humble enough to know that not everything that not every idea that comes out of my mouth or not every word that comes out of my mouth is going to be this brilliant, life-changing thing. That a lot of them are actually going to be quite crap.
Yeah.
So I think I think to co-create requires a great deal of humility.
So that makes me think of how do you it's one thing to set off with that intent, but we are human beings, so it takes a lot of practice and experience to get to the point where you can accept what you believe is just a fantastic world-changing idea, whether tiny or huge. It takes a while to kind of get used to that idea being discarded. I think there's something more than, well, maybe it is still humility, but it's what I'm thinking of is in the moment, that specific situation where your idea moves off the board and is put to one side or discarded altogether. Is that humility, or is that something else? The ability to cope with that and stay in the situation.
I think that's a combination of humility and curiosity. I think being curious about what else allows us to discard our ideas.
Okay.
And then I think the humility helps us cope with that idea being discarded.
Okay. I like that, and I like so what we're saying is curiosity in slightly more concrete terms is the ability to basically ask questions. We've got this kind of feeling of curiosity. We'll translate that into the action that translates into is actually asking questions, and either asking questions to ourselves or going further and asking questions of other people. Is that kind of what one of the things you're saying there?
Yep.
And I do love that idea of, well, let's have a super quick healing of that small wound, that you emotional wound of your idea just not being right for the thing, by healing that with a question. I love that idea.
I think the other thing, just to close off the thing about discarding ideas, so like I keep a journal of ideas. And even the ones that get discarded, because what I have learned as a designer is sometimes what seems like a bad idea in this situation ends up being a great idea somewhere else. So sometimes I think it might help to think about temporarily discarding it, not permanently discarding it.
Oh yes, that is helpful actually. Yes, the idea, if you write it down, the idea is going to exist for as long as that writing does. So do you go back to you keep your ideas in an idea journal, and kind of do you have a routine for looking at that, or?
Yeah, I use Evernote, and I have a notebook within Evernote just for ideas. The only reason I do that is because after a while it got to be, I was killing forests. But I like it because sometimes, when I'm just kind of feeling stuck on something, I'll go look at my Evernote book and scroll, and sometimes it isn't, sometimes it isn't what's on the screen that's like, oh, that was a brilliant idea, but looking at my past ideas sometimes helps me think of new ones. So but I know that I've created this space where all of my ideas can continue to live on.
Nice. So that helps you move on. Yeah, I like that. I'm just picturing where all my ideas go. Lots of them are written down in notebooks, but they're not in one place. That would be a tidying up project for sure. But I haven't looked through those notebooks for a while. That could be something we build in. So again, that kind of part of curiosity, being curious about ideas that you've had previously.
But also, this was a this was an example of curiosity, right? Like I said something and you're like, oh,
yeah,
tell me
I
more about
wonder.
that.
Yeah. So we have humility, curiosity, empathy. What else might we need? What else do we need? This is a good exercise. Like, what have you and I kind of learned to do that we need to, you know, take a step back from and realize that we're doing something? What are the aspects of what we unconsciously competent in that
I think the thing
helps
we've
us
missed
do
is
coding?
iteration.
Iteration. Okay. Tell me more about that.
Well, if you think back to some of the things you and I have created together, you know, we had an idea, we kind of created the thing, then we kind of let it be for a little bit, then we come back to it, and then, you know, we've gone, I really liked this, but now that I've thought about it, you know, and we have, again, different views on what you've had different rethinking, I've had different rethinking, and then so then we have to go through that process again of being empathetic, curious, humble, to get through the next iteration. And we do that, right? But I don't think you and I sit down and go, oh, let's iterate. We just sort of go, well, I've been thinking.
yeah, we did that. That's very true, actually. Yeah, I like that. You know, we haven't consciously divided our kind of time up into right now. So now we're going to iterate. I guess we've kind of naturally done it because we've been curious and empathetic and occasionally humble. It makes me, so talking about iteration, for me, that's where design and especially code design really comes to life. You know, it moves on from where ideas start to actually happen and potentially make a difference. It reminded me of a quote from Ed Catmull, who's the I think he's still the chief exec of Pixar. So his book Creativity Inc. He talks about, I'll probably mangle this quote, but he talks about their job is to make their movies, it's something like make their movies not suck. And what he means by that is the first kind of iteration of any Pixar movie sucks big time. And I think but their job is then to take it from suck to not suck to, you know, as you know, anyone who's watched the Pixar movie, they tend to be a lot better than just not sucking. They're pretty amazing works of art and entertainment. But what he's saying there is, you know, when we watch that movie, we see you know, a finished thing. The people who made it probably see things that they could keep doing, but to us it's finished. It's a cohesive you know, piece of art and entertainment. It starts life with something that is completely different to what we're seeing, and you know, if we watch the first version of any of these, you know, movies, Inside Out or what's the latest Pixar movie? Have you watched the Pixar movie recently?
Ooh, I've watched a lot of Pixar movies, but I can't recall what I watched the latest, the last one I've watched.
Actually, I think Soul was the last one I watched. Is it called Soul? Yeah. Have you watched Soul?
No.
No. The name might be wrong. Anyway. So they all suck to begin with, and then Pixar's job is to iterate, like continuously iterate, to make every aspect of that movie not suck, from, you know, anything imaginable, from the smallest detail to the largest. Even, you know, even the stories will change hugely from the first version to the final version that we see. I thought that was really interesting, and that quote really struck a chord with me to remind us, especially when we're working in big organizations that have a lots of investment and momentum behind them, that it's okay to start with something that is not very good, because you then trust the process and you trust the co-design process to create something that is really good in the end.
And I think that's where the concept of, fail quickly kind of came from, which I know has been, a bit bastardized over the years. But the sooner you can get to that first iteration and realize how bad it is, the sooner you can start to get to the better versions, right?
Yeah.
Definitely, which for us, Dani, means that we need to get this podcast to our audience as early as we can, so we can start getting feedback on it, doesn't it? How do you feel about that? Let's share with the audience how we feel about sharing this podcast.
I feel both excited and petrified. Because I think Pete and I have had a lot of chats about this podcast and what we wanted to do. And then we got to this point going, wait a minute, we haven't followed one of the fundamental principles of design, which is, involving the people that we want to ultimately be the listeners of this.
Yeah.
So then we decided, you know what, we're going to take a prototype approach to this. We are really passionate about this. So we're going to create a prototype, put it out there, and see what people think about it. So I guess I'm sharing that to go, while I'm excited, I'm also petrified, because is it going to work? Is it not going to work? What are people going to say? What are people going to think? And then the all dreaded, oh my God, how do I sound? So that is the space I am in. What about you, Pete?
I'm kind of similar, actually. I am excited to get started. That's one of my favorite design maxims. Don't get ready, get started. Perry Claiborne from the Stanford D School. Great saying. So we've got started. We're making our prototypes. I'm really excited about that, but I am also really nervous about a couple of things. One, yes, we're always worried about how we sound and don't like how we sound. That's probably a whole separate podcast. And then what are we saying? And I guess that relates to what do people think of this? Because our intent is not just to record ourselves talking for the sake of it. We want to record this and I guess share our thinking with other people, and hopefully that thinking helps them, either because it helps them realize they completely disagree with us and helps them form a concrete point of view. That's awesome. Or maybe they agree with us and this is helping them crystallize their thinking the other end of the spectrum. So I guess the only way to find out whether we're getting there, Dani, is to publish this somewhere and get people to listen to it. So in the future, you will be listening to this, whoever you are, and I hope you got something from our recordings.
Absolutely. So I guess the only way we're going to get this out there so that we could start prototype testing is to wrap up this recording.
Yes, if we don't start recording, we can't post it anywhere.
Exactly. So just to wrap up, I think we started this conversation talking about what does co-design mean, and Pete and I shared what we think. We'd love to hear if you've got a different definition of that. And then we talked about some of the things that we need to be able to engage in co-design. And Pete and I started in different realms of that. And I think we landed on a few things. So the first thing is, to be able to co-design, you need at least one other person. Otherwise, we defined it as designing in a vacuum.
Yeah. Nice.
Then you need curiosity, empathy, humility, and iteration.
Nice.
So those are the things we came up with. Would love to hear what your thoughts are, whoever you are out there listening. And looking forward to hearing from you all.
We
Awesome.
certainly are.
Cool. See ya.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.